I was standing barefoot on my driveway just before 6 in the morning when I realized the HOA head was on my roof. Not inspecting, not taking photos, spray painting my solar panels neon pink. As Marilyn Crowley didn't even look startled when I shouted. She didn't rush. She didn't hide the can. She just smiled, shook it once, and kept spraying like she was touching up a fence she owned. She told me the panels were ugly, said they were dragging down property values, claimed she'd warned me multiple times, which was a lie, and she knew it. Then she looked straight at me and said, calm as could be, I've been running this HOA for almost a decade. I decide what belongs in this neighborhood. What Marilyn didn't know, what she never bothered to ask, was that those panels didn't just power my house. They powered every off-grid security camera in the neighborhood, every threat she'd made, every illegal fine she'd signed, every whispered plan to punish families who didn't fall in line. All of it was being recorded. And right then, she was committing a felony in full view of the system that would end her. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to HOA Gone Wild. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? To understand why those solar panels mattered so much, you have to rewind a few years, back to a time when my life was held together by duct tape, spreadsheets, and sheer stubbornness. My name is Ethan Cole. I work as an electrical systems engineer, and before that, I served as an Army signal technician. I spent years learning how to keep power and communications alive in places where failure wasn't an inconvenience. It got people hurt. When I got out and settled in Willow Ridge Estates, I thought my days of crisis planning were behind me. Then my wife, Rachel, got sick. The diagnosis came fast. The treatments came faster. Chemo, radiation, medications with names we couldn't pronounce and bills we couldn't ignore. Insurance helped, but not enough. By the time Rachel was declared cancer-free, we were staring at a stack of medical debt that felt heavier than the disease itself. We didn't splurge. We didn't vacation. We cut everything down to the bone. Still, the numbers barely moved. The solar panels weren't a statement. They weren't political. They weren't about status. They were survival. I ran the math 6 different ways. Permits were pulled. County inspections were passed. Every bolt, wire, and inverter met code. When the system went live, our electric bill dropped to something manageable, and for the first time in years, Rachel slept through the night without worrying about another envelope in the mailbox. But I couldn't help noticing something else. The neighborhood had problems. Package thefts were common. Cars got rummaged through at night. A couple of elderly residents lost power during summer storms and had to sit in the dark waiting for utility trucks that never seemed to arrive quickly enough. People complained in the HOA group chat, but nothing changed. Marilyn Crow always had an excuse. Not enough budget. Not a priority. Not the HOA's responsibility. Old habits die hard. I still thought like a signal tech, so I built redundancy. I installed battery backups for my own house first, then quietly helped a few neighbors do the same. Nothing flashy. Just enough power to keep lights, phones, and medical devices running during outages. When storms rolled through, I checked in on people. Extension cords crossed lawns. Coffee was shared. Trust built itself naturally. Someone asked if I could help install a camera after a break-in. Then another neighbor asked. Then another. I chose low-profile models, no blinking lights, no intrusive angles. Each homeowner controlled their own footage. The only thing tying them together was the power source. The solar array fed the system through isolated circuits, completely independent of the grid. No HOA funds, no HOA oversight. Just neighbors helping neighbors. The effect was immediate. Porch pirates vanished. Cars stopped getting touched. Kids started riding bikes again without parents hovering at the curb. Dorothy Hale, the widow 3 houses down, told me she finally felt safe walking her dog after sunset. People waved more, talked more, looked out for each other. That's when Marilyn noticed. At first it was subtle. A comment during an HOA meeting about unauthorized modifications. A vague email reminding residents that visual consistency maintains property values. She never said my name, but everyone knew who she meant. Then the letters started showing up in my mailbox. Not friendly reminders, formal notices, threats of fines, claims that my panels violated aesthetic standards that, strangely enough, weren't written anywhere in the bylaws. I responded the only way I knew how, calmly and with documentation. I sent permits, inspection reports, state statutes protecting residential solar installations. I even offered to meet to explain the system, to show her that nothing about it endangered the neighborhood. She didn't respond to any of that. Instead, she started circling. She'd slow her car near my house, stop and stare at the roof, ask other neighbors pointed questions about who had cameras and why. She framed it as concern, but the tone was wrong. Sharp, possessive. Marilyn Crow didn't hate the panels because they were ugly. She hated them because she didn't approve them, because she didn't control them, because they worked. And in a neighborhood where people were getting safer, quieter, and more independent without her permission, that was something she could not tolerate. I didn't realize it yet, but the moment the cameras started doing their job, Marilyn decided I was a problem that needed to be dealt with. The first violation notice arrived in a plain white envelope, slipped into my mailbox like junk mail. No knock, no conversation. Just paper authority pretending to be law. According to Marilyn Crow, my solar panels were suddenly a problem. The letter claimed they violated community aesthetic harmony. It demanded that I rotate them to a less visible angle, repaint the frames to a neutral HOA approved color, or remove them entirely. If I didn't comply within 10 days, daily fines would begin accumulating. I read it twice, then laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so obviously wrong. I sat down at my desk and responded calmly. I attached copies of the permits, county inspection approvals, state statutes that explicitly protected residential solar installations from HOA interference. I included diagrams showing the panels were installed exactly as approved. I even highlighted the relevant sections of the bylaws that said nothing about banning them. I wasn't trying to win an argument. I was trying to end one. Marilyn never replied. Instead, another letter arrived 3 days later. This one was harsher, the language colder. It accused me of willful noncompliance and warned that fines would be backdated if I didn't act immediately. There was still no reference to any specific rule I'd broken, just demands. I sent another response, shorter this time, clearer. I asked her to cite the exact bylaw I was violating. Silence. Then the fines started appearing on my HOA account anyway. That was when I realized this wasn't about panels. It was about control. Within a week, other people started getting letters too. Not randomly, not evenly, selectively. The first was Mark Jensen, a retired Marine who lived 2 doors down. He'd helped me lift one of the battery cabinets into place during a storm. Suddenly, he was cited for having an unauthorized flag mount on his porch, the same flag he'd flown for years. Next was Claire Thompson, a single mother across the street who let her kids ride bikes with mine. She received a violation for improper trash bin placement, even though her bins were exactly where the HOA diagram said they should be. Then Dorothy Hale came over, trembling, with a folded notice clutched in her hands. Dorothy was in her 70s. Her husband had passed away 5 years earlier. After he died, she placed a small wooden bench under the oak tree in her front yard, with a brass plaque bearing his name. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't big. Most people didn't even notice it unless they stopped to sit. Marilyn noticed. The notice claimed the bench was an OWN-approved structure and demanded its removal within 5 days. Failure to comply would result in fines and forced remediation. Dorothy asked me if she'd done something wrong. That was the moment something in my chest tightened. I pulled up the footage from my cameras and started paying closer attention. Marilyn wasn't just sending letters. She was making rounds, walking properties with a clipboard, stopping to talk to certain board members, whispering, pointing. And she wasn't careful about what she said. One afternoon, while standing in my garage pretending to organize tools, I caught audio from a camera mounted near the street. Marilyn was talking to another board member, her voice sharp and confident. "People need to learn who's in charge," she said. "If you let one person ignore the rules, the whole neighborhood falls apart." There was no mention of safety, no concern about fairness, just dominance. I saved the clip. I started saving everything, every notice, every fine, every email that contradicted the last one. I created folders, timestamps, backups. Years of military habit kicked in without me thinking about it. Documentation wasn't optional. It was survival. I requested a formal meeting with the HOA board to address the inconsistencies. Marilyn denied it, citing a full agenda. I offered to provide additional documentation. She didn't acknowledge it. Instead, she sent out a neighborhood-wide email reminding residents that association leadership decisions are final and warning against unauthorized cooperation that undermines community standards. People started getting nervous. Some neighbors stopped waving. A few avoided eye contact, not because they believed Marilyn, but because they were afraid of becoming her next target. Others quietly apologized to me, saying they didn't want trouble. I understood. That's how power like hers survives. Not through rules, but through fear. The cameras kept recording. One evening, I watched Marilyn stop in front of Dorothy's house. She stared at the bench, shook her head, and made a note on her clipboard. The next day, Dorothy received a second notice, this one threatening a lion. That was it. This was no longer a disagreement over aesthetics or bylaws. It wasn't even about me anymore. Marilyn had turned paper into a weapon and was swinging it at anyone who didn't fall in line. And the more she escalated, the more evidence she created against herself. She thought she was tightening her grip on the neighborhood. What she was really doing was building the record that would bring her down. Marilyn's next move came faster than I expected, and it came from outside the neighborhood. One morning, I got a notice taped to my front door saying the city had received multiple complaints about my unlicensed electrical system. According to the form, my solar setup was supposedly a fire hazard, a grid interference risk, and a danger to surrounding homes. The handwriting in the margin was neat and angry, and I didn't need a signature to know exactly who had filed it. Marilyn hadn't beaten me with HOA paper, so she'd gone shopping for bigger authority. I won't lie, that notice rattled me. Not because I'd done anything wrong, but because I knew how these things usually went. Once government inspectors get involved, even innocent homeowners can get buried in delays, fees, and stress. Rachel tried to stay calm, but I could see the worry creeping back into her eyes, the same look she had when the medical bills used to arrive. 3 days later, a county truck pulled up in front of my house. The inspector introduced himself as Paul Henley, middle-aged, tired eyes, no attitude. He told me straight up that he was there because of multiple safety complaints and that he needed to look over the system. I handed him the permits before he even asked. He raised an eyebrow. "That's usually not how this goes," he said. I walked him through everything. The panels, the inverters, the battery backups, the isolation switches. He took his time, asked sharp questions, and checked serial numbers against paperwork. I answered everything without rushing him. Years in the Army taught me one thing: you don't bluff professionals. After nearly an hour, Paul stepped back, folded his clipboard, and nodded. "This was clean," he said. "Honestly, better documented than most commercial installs I see." Relief hit me like a wave. But he wasn't done. Paul glanced down the street, then back at me. "Mind if I check a few other things while I'm here? If the HOA filed this many complaints, I want to make sure there isn't something bigger going on." I told him to help himself. That's when everything shifted. Paul walked over to the HOA installed entrance sign at the front of the neighborhood. The decorative lighting around it flickered when he opened the panel. He frowned, pulled out a tester, and muttered something under his breath. "This isn't permitted," he said, "and it's not grounded properly." We moved on to the streetlights the HOA had added the previous year. Same problem: unpermitted work, improper splices, wires run through conduit that didn't meet code. Then Paul traced a power line that disappeared into a homeowner's garage. "You know this is feeding off a private residence?" he asked. I did not. Neither, apparently, did the homeowner. By the time Paul left, he wasn't talking about my solar system anymore. He was talking about issuing notices to the HOA itself. Within days, Marilyn's tone changed. The violation letters stopped. The emails went quiet. She didn't drive slowly past my house anymore. For the first time since this started, she looked cautious. That's when Luis Moreno knocked on my door. Luis lived 2 houses down. Quiet guy. Friendly, but not nosy. He worked as a paralegal for a civil litigation firm in the next county. Up until then, he'd kept his distance from the HOA mess, the way smart people often do. He asked if we could talk privately. Louise had been reviewing HOA financial statements that were circulated to residents every quarter. He said something about the numbers didn't sit right with him. Landscaping expenses were unusually high, repetitive, always rounded, always paid to the same company. The name on the checks was Crow Outdoor Services, Marilyn's husband. Louise pulled up public business records. No competitive bids, no disclosure statements, no conflict of interest waivers. Just year after year of HOA money flowing into a company owned by the HOA head's spouse. "That's not just unethical," Louise said quietly. "That's actionable." We sat at my kitchen table and went through everything. Payments, dates, invoices that looked copied and pasted, charges for work that neighbors swore never happened, mulching billed in winter, tree trimming billed on streets without trees. The deeper we looked, the worse it got. And the entire time, the cameras kept recording. Marilyn arguing with board members. Marilyn making phone calls in her driveway. Marilyn pacing, gesturing, snapping. None of it illegal by itself, but all of it telling a story. She had tried to bring real authority down on me, thinking it would scare me into submission. Instead, she'd accidentally invited real authority to take a closer look at her. I didn't confront her. I didn't warn her. I didn't even let on that we'd noticed the money trail. I just kept documenting. Because at that point, it was clear this wasn't going to end with an apology or a compromise. It was going to end with exposure. And Marilyn Crow was still acting like she owned the neighborhood, completely unaware that the ground under her power was already cracking. After the inspector left and the noise died down, something in me shifted. I stopped reacting. No more angry drafts I deleted before sending. No more pacing the kitchen after another email from Marilyn. No more replaying conversations in my head, wondering what I should have said differently. I stopped arguing. Instead, I started treating the situation the same way I used to treat unstable systems in the Army: assume failure is coming, and build the record that explains why. I turned my spare bedroom into a workspace. Monitors on one wall, hard drives labeled and stacked on a shelf. I created folders by date, by address, by incident. Every camera angle was mapped, every field of view documented. I noted blind spots and adjusted coverage, so there were none. Audio feeds were tested and time-synced. I exported footage in original formats and verified checksums so nothing could be questioned later. Metadata was preserved. Nothing was edited. Nothing was enhanced. Raw truth only. Emails went into their own archive. Each message from Marilyn, each notice, each contradiction. I highlighted where she cited rules that didn't exist, where she claimed authority she didn't have, where her language shifted from administrative to personal. I saved audio clips of her conversations, not just the dramatic ones, the casual ones, the moments where she forgot she was being careful. Tone matters. Intent matters. Patterns matter. This wasn't paranoia. This was preparation. Rachel watched all of this quietly. One night after Lily had gone to bed, she asked me how far I planned to take it. As far as it has to go, I said, and no farther. Marilyn felt the change before she could see it. The letters stopped, but the pressure didn't. Instead, she switched tactics. If she couldn't intimidate me on paper, she'd try to get a reaction out of me in person. One morning, I woke up to find her SUV parked sideways at the end of my driveway, not blocking it completely. Just enough to make pulling out difficult, just enough to force a decision. I stepped outside with my coffee and looked at it. Marilyn was sitting inside, window down, sunglasses on. She smiled like this was all a joke. "Morning," she said. "Tight squeeze, huh?" I didn't respond. I just turned and went back inside. That afternoon, she did it again. This time, Lily was with me. She was supposed to walk to the bus stop with her backpack bouncing against her shoulders, the way she always did. Instead, she stood at the edge of the driveway, confused, staring at the SUV blocking her usual path. Marilyn leaned out the window. "Sweetheart, you'll have to walk around today," she said, syrupy and false. "Some people don't like following rules." Lily looked at me. I felt something hot and sharp settle in my chest. I took Lily's hand and walked her the long way around, past Marilyn's car, past her smile, past her quiet satisfaction. I didn't say a word. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even look at her. But the cameras did, every angle, every second. The audio, Marilyn's tone, Lily's confusion, the deliberate nature of it all. That night, I reviewed the footage twice. The first time as a father. The second time as someone preparing a case. That was the moment the line was crossed, not because it inconvenienced me, not because it embarrassed me, because she used my child as leverage. From that point on, the goal changed. This was no longer about stopping the harassment. It wasn't about correcting behavior or forcing compliance with the law. It wasn't even about protecting my own family anymore. It was about accountability. I reached out to Luis again. He introduced me to an attorney who specialized in civil abuse of authority cases. I didn't give names. I didn't tell the story emotionally. I handed over folders. The attorney didn't interrupt once. When he finished reviewing the initial batch, he leaned back in his chair and said, "This isn't an HOA dispute." I nodded. "It's a pattern of targeted harassment," he continued. "And you've documented it better than most police departments." That was when I knew. This wasn't going to end with Marilyn backing down quietly. People like her don't do quiet. They don't apologize. They don't self-correct. They overreach. And when they do, they leave fingerprints everywhere. I stopped worrying about what Marilyn might do next. I stopped checking my email every hour. I stopped trying to anticipate her moves. Because no matter what she did, the system was already in place to capture it. Every provocation, every abuse of authority, every decision she thought no one would challenge. This wasn't going to end with fines being waived or letters being retracted. It was going to end in court. And for the first time since this started, I felt calm. Marilyn didn't back off. She escalated the only way people like her know how, by trying to crush me under the weight of the legal system. The lawsuit arrived by certified mail, thick enough to feel heavy in my hands. Dozens of pages. Legal language designed to intimidate. She accused me of emotional distress, harassment, defamation, and damages to the HOA. According to her filing, my solar panels were part of a hostile campaign meant to undermine her authority and destabilize the community. The amount she was seeking was obscene, enough to scare anyone who hadn't already been living with pressure for months. Rachel read the first few pages and went pale. Marilyn was counting on that reaction. She assumed I'd panic, that I'd scramble to settle, that I'd beg her to make it go away before attorney fees swallowed us whole. She assumed wrong. I called our attorney and dropped the packet off that same afternoon. He didn't look impressed. "This is bluster," he said after skimming the claims. "But it's reckless bluster. Reckless because once you file a civil lawsuit, you don't control the scope anymore. Discovery cuts both ways." Within days, we filed our response and counterclaims. We requested discovery, not just on her allegations, but on HOA operations, enforcement practices, financial records, and internal communications. That was when the tone changed. Marilyn's attorney reached out asking if we could narrow the scope. We declined, because once discovery opened, everything Marilyn had worked so hard to keep hidden was suddenly fair game. Her emails to board members became evidence. The ones where she talked about making examples of certain residents. The ones where she bragged about backdating fines. The ones where she discussed strategy, not compliance. Her text messages came next, late-night rants. Instructions to board members to hold the line. Messages where she admitted she didn't care whether the rules technically allowed something, as long as people obeyed. Then the financial records arrived. Louise helped review them, and the pattern was unmistakable. Payments to her husband's landscaping company weren't just questionable. They were systemic. Identical invoices, repeated charges, work billed in locations where nothing had been done. The deeper discovery went, the more frantic Marilyn became. She started sending emails at all hours, sometimes contradicting herself within the same thread. She demanded emergency board meetings, then canceled them. She accused other board members of disloyalty and threatened to remove them. And all of it was documented. During a deposition, she was asked simple questions about HOA procedures. She couldn't answer them without checking notes. When asked why certain residents were fined and others weren't, she stumbled. When confronted with her own words, emails projected on a screen, timestamps visible, she grew defensive, then angry, then careless. She raised her voice. She blamed others. She denied things that were plainly written in black and white. Panic stripped away the careful mask she'd worn for years. Outside the courtroom, her behavior grew worse. She confronted neighbors in driveways, sent mass emails accusing people of betrayal, claimed there was a conspiracy against her. The cameras kept capturing everything. One night, I watched footage of her pacing in front of my house, phone pressed to her ear, gesturing wildly. She stopped, looked straight at one of the cameras, and flipped it off. That gesture ended up in an exhibit list. By the time depositions wrapped, Marilyn's attorney looked exhausted. The HOA's insurance carrier started asking questions. Board members began quietly distancing themselves. The lawsuit that was supposed to bankrupt me was doing the opposite. It was dismantling her. What Marilyn never understood was that lawsuits don't reward emotion or authority. They reward facts, timelines, consistency. She had none of those. She had stories that changed depending on who was listening. She had rules that only applied when convenient. She had power built on intimidation rather than legality. And once discovery dragged all of that into the light, there was no putting it back. Marilyn had wanted to scare me into silence. Instead, she'd forced every secret she had onto the public record. And as the case moved closer to trial, I could see it happening in real time. The loss of control, the unraveling, the desperation. People who are used to power panic when it stops working. And when they panic, they make mistakes, big ones. The night air was thick, heavy with the scent of wet asphalt and fear. Just before 3 in the morning, headlights cut through the darkness, revealing Marilyn and her husband creeping along the cul-de-sac, spray cans in hand, tools rattling in their backpacks. Their movements were precise, rehearsed even, as if they'd done this 100 times. Shadows bounced off the houses, but they didn't notice the tiny red lights blinking back at them. Cameras silently recording, streaming live to anyone who happened to be watching. They started at the corner house, leaving jagged streaks of paint across shutters and garage doors. Windows bore the brunt of their anger, shards of glass reflecting the harsh glare of a street lamp. The couple moved from property to property, their energy fueled by some twisted sense of revenge. Their laughter echoed through the quiet streets, a hollow, triumphant sound. They didn't see the first flashes of blue in the distance. By the time they reached the third house, the neighborhood was already awake in the form of the cameras. Every motion was captured. Marilyn's hand jerking as she scratched a neighbor's fence, her husband prying at a mailbox, the spray paint hissing out in angry bursts. 4 angles, perfectly framed, chronicled every moment of the crime like a macabre play. The sound of sirens cut through the chaos, sharp and unrelenting. Panic replaced their bravado. Marilyn froze, spray can poised mid-air, while her husband spun around, eyes wide, realizing too late that escape was impossible. The cameras captured their attempts to flee, slips, stumbles, frantic jerks of the doors, hands clawing at fences. It all played out in real time for anyone watching. Within minutes, police cruisers descended from multiple streets, lights painting the houses in red and blue streaks. Officers moved with practiced precision, surrounding the vandals before they could make it past the cul-de-sac. The arrest was textbook firm, swift, unavoidable. Handcuffs clicked, and the couple's defiance melted into stunned silence. Each angle of the cameras showed their disbelief, their futile resistance, their shame in vivid detail. The livestream viewers were silent at first, then erupted into a mix of shock and vindication. By sunrise, the footage had gone viral. Social media feeds were flooded with the images, replayed and analyzed frame by frame. Neighbors shared their astonishment, tagging friends, demanding answers, reveling in the cathartic justice they'd witnessed without leaving their beds. The crime, once cloaked in darkness, was now exposed to the world. Every smear of paint, every broken fixture, every frantic glance was documented, unalterable, undeniable. Marilyn and her husband became infamous overnight. The courthouse was brimming with spectators eager to see them in the harsh light of accountability. The neighborhood, once tense with fear, breathed a collective sigh of relief. Conversations were no longer whispers of, "Did you hear?" but proud recountings of, "We saw it happen. We caught them." The cameras that had once silently observed had now cemented the truth in public memory, a record impossible to dispute. The final irony wasn't lost on anyone. They had thought themselves clever, invisible under the cloak of night, only to be undone by the very technology they ignored. Their plan, meticulous as it was, unraveled in a matter of minutes, and every detail was broadcast to the world, a permanent testament to their recklessness. The streets, once quiet and fearful, now hummed with the renewed confidence of justice served. By the time the sun climbed high, casting golden light across the freshly scarred neighborhood, the vandals were locked away, their story told from 4 angles, streamed live, replayed endlessly. The houses bore the evidence of chaos, but the community bore witness to triumph. What had started as a night of terror ended in full transparency, proof that no matter how careful the wrongdoing, the truth, once captured, has a way of reaching everyone. The morning after the arrests, the tension in the community was palpable. The once quiet HOA hall was packed beyond capacity, chairs lined wall to wall, neighbors standing in every corner, murmuring anxiously. I stepped up to the podium, my hands steady despite the adrenaline still pulsing through me. The room fell silent as I began presenting the evidence that had been painstakingly collected over months: emails, financial statements, selective fine notices, and most damning of all, the live video footage of Marilyn and her husband committing vandalism. Each slide, each clip, landed like a hammer. Faces went pale as the scope of corruption unfolded before them. Financial fraud, hidden accounts, misappropriated dues, all laid bare. Selective enforcement of rules, targeting certain homeowners while letting others slide, became undeniable. Evidence of discrimination and harassment emerged from decades of HOA records. And the videos, captured in perfect clarity, showed the raw arrogance and recklessness of Marilyn and her husband. Whispers turned into audible gasps. County officials had been alerted beforehand, but their presence now carried real weight. They stepped forward, reviewing documents, taking notes, and nodding gravely. Questions were asked, explanations demanded. When I replayed the footage of the couple vandalizing homes, pointing out the timestamps and angles, there was no room left for doubt. The evidence was irrefutable. The board members exchanged nervous glances, the reality sinking in. Their reign of control, built on fear and manipulation, was crumbling before their eyes. Minutes turned into hours. The board tried to defend themselves, citing procedural loopholes, claiming ignorance, blaming one another. But every defense was shredded under the weight of hard proof. Selective enforcement memos, fraudulent expense reports, and video evidence left no corner unexposed. County officials, after deliberation in the room itself, declared the board immediately removed. Their authority was revoked on the spot, and the weight of their misdeeds settled on them like a tangible, suffocating presence. Federal investigators didn't wait long. Agents from the Department of Housing and Urban Development arrived with subpoenas in hand, reviewing financial records and board communications. The investigation widened, probing deeper into past violations and misconduct. When questioned about the vandalism, Marilyn froze under interrogation. Her husband, faced with the possibility of years behind bars, began to crack. He revealed the full extent of their schemes, implicating himself, his wife, and even several rogue board members in collusion. Marilyn's arrest was swift. She was charged with multiple counts, from property destruction to obstruction, and each charge carried the weight of the evidence we had painstakingly documented. Her husband, once cocky and defiant, now flipped, cooperating fully with federal investigators in exchange for a lighter sentence. Every lie they had relied upon, every attempt to intimidate neighbors, was now laid bare for prosecutors, media, and the entire community to see. In the weeks that followed, the HOA faced complete dissolution. A court-supervised restructuring was implemented, putting a neutral administrator in place to oversee operations and ensure compliance with legal and ethical standards. Past board members were barred from holding office, and strict financial oversight became mandatory. Where once fear and manipulation reigned, transparency and accountability took root. The community, initially fractured by years of corruption, began to rally around the new structure. Neighbors who had once avoided confrontation now participated openly. Meetings became collaborative rather than combative, and trust slowly returned. The aftermath wasn't just legal, it was cultural. Homeowners now spoke freely about the past abuses, sharing stories that had been suppressed under the old regime. discussions of selective enforcement, discriminatory rules, and harassment became part of the collective memory, a cautionary tale of what unchecked power can do. Children, once witnesses to the tension and anxiety, could now play in their yards without the shadow of intimidation. The neighborhood itself seemed lighter, as if the very streets breathed easier, liberated from the weight of fear. Looking back, the collapse of the HOA was total and irrevocable. What had started as a series of personal vendettas and abuses escalated into a full exposure of systemic corruption, criminal behavior, and reckless arrogance. The legal consequences were severe, the personal costs high, but the community emerged stronger. The lesson was undeniable. No amount of authority, no set of rules, and no personal vendetta can survive the light of evidence, transparency, and collective action. The HOA that had once held the neighborhood hostage was gone, replaced by a system that valued fairness, justice, and accountability above all else. By the time the final restructuring orders were signed, the neighborhood had transformed. Trust was fragile but growing, lessons were etched in memory, and the specter of Marilyn, her husband, and the rogue board lingered only as a stark reminder abuse of power is temporary, but truth is permanent. The HOA's collapse became more than a story of crime. It became a story of justice, resilience, and the unstoppable force of a community united. The morning after the final court order, the neighborhood felt different. Quiet, steady, almost calm. The solar panels still lined rooftops, humming softly in the sun. The cameras remained in place, unobtrusive yet watchful, a permanent reminder that transparency had won. Streets that had once echoed with whispered fear now carried only the sounds of everyday life, footsteps on sidewalks, kids laughing as they ran to the bus, the occasional bark of a dog. I walked slowly down the cul-de-sac, noticing details I had long ignored. Fences freshly repaired, lawns neatly trimmed, neighbors greeting each other with a casual nod instead of tense avoidance. It struck me then what had really defeated Marilyn. It hadn't been anger, shouting, or even confrontations. It had been the records, documents, videos, and carefully preserved evidence. Each timestamp, each spreadsheet, each captured email built a story that couldn't be denied, a truth that couldn't be bent by ego or intimidation. Justice, I realized, doesn't need theatrics. It needs documentation. Sitting on the front steps, I felt the weight of months lift. The neighborhood was peaceful again, but stronger, wiser. People now understood that authority can be challenged, that rules exist to serve, not oppress, and that courage comes in many forms, often quiet and meticulous. If you've ever faced a situation where someone abuses their power, remember, keep careful records. Evidence matters more than anger, and preparation is more powerful than confrontation. Document, protect, and let the truth speak for itself. That's the most effective way to win, without ever raising your voice.